The courtroom was filled with a heavy silence, the kind that made even the smallest movement echo across the chamber. At the center of it all stood a young woman in her sharp ceremonial uniform, a tomb guard whose reputation for loyalty and discipline was legendary. She had been brought in not as a protector of honor today, but as someone accused of crossing lines that the powerful did not want exposed. The crowd that had gathered, reporters, citizens, and other officials, watched with bated breath, confused as to why someone known for such unshakable integrity would even be in chains. The bailiff, under whispered orders, stepped forward and locked a pair of steel handcuffs around her wrists, the loud click ringing through the chamber like an insult to the very symbol she represented. Murmurs spread quickly, with some shaking their heads in disbelief and others leaning forward to catch every word. She stood tall despite the humiliation, her chin raised, eyes steady, refusing to let them see her break. But those who had orchestrated this trial, powerful men in dark suits and self-righteous robes, smiled thinly, satisfied that the image of her restrained would weaken her stance and silence her story. What they underestimated was that this act of public shaming would set into motion a chain of events they could never control, because sometimes justice walks into a room when least expected, and it arrives wearing the authority of someone who fears nothing. The judge, a man notorious for favoring those in positions of influence, leaned forward with a smirk that barely disguised his contempt. His voice carried over the hushed crowd, dripping with mockery as he accused the guard of insubordination and misuse of her authority. He twisted the truth, painting her as reckless, claiming she had disobeyed direct orders during a ceremonial watch, when in fact, she had only stood firm to protect the sanctity of her duty against a corrupt official who had tried to desecrate it. She wanted to speak, to reveal the truth, but each attempt was quickly shut down with threats of contempt. The cuffs dug deeper into her wrists, not just physically but symbolically, a reminder that they believed her voice no longer mattered. But even as the judge raised his hand to silence her, even as the attorneys for the prosecution smirked with rehearsed confidence, she felt an inner fire refusing to die out. Every soldier, every guard trained in the ways of honor, knew that silence could sometimes be louder than words, and though her lips remained pressed shut, her eyes spoke volumes. The spectators felt it too, an unease that rippled through them. Something about the way she stood, restrained but unbroken, made it clear this was not going to end the way her accusers had planned. Tension mounted as the prosecution began presenting fabricated evidence, documents and testimonies that contradicted everything known about her years of service. They paraded false witnesses who stumbled through carefully rehearsed lies, hoping the sheer weight of words would bury her reputation. Each accusation drew gasps from the public benches, yet her silence, her unyielding presence, grew more powerful with each passing minute. For those who had served with her, who had witnessed her dedication firsthand, the sight was agonizing, but many remained silent out of fear. The judge allowed the lies to stack up, almost impatiently pushing the trial toward a guilty verdict. Then, just when it seemed the hammer of injustice would fall without resistance, the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a force that silenced everything. Boots echoed against the marble floor, slow and deliberate, and a commanding presence filled the air even before his face was visible. A man in full military uniform entered, chest decorated with medals that spoke of decades of service. The moment the crowd recognized the rank insignia, a colonel, the whispers turned into stunned silence. He carried no papers, no prepared speech, only an authority that came not from position alone, but from the respect he commanded wherever he went. He did not ask permission to enter, he simply came forward, his eyes fixed on the restrained tomb guard like a father approaching his own child. The judge's composure faltered for the first time, his gavel stalling midair as the colonel approached the defense table without hesitation. "Uncuff her," the colonel's voice thundered, echoing across the courtroom like an order given on the battlefield. The bailiffs froze, unsure whether to obey the judge or the man whose authority felt absolute. For a brief moment, no one moved, but then the colonel's glare hardened, and one of the guards, trembling, stepped forward to unlock the cuffs. The sound of the metal releasing was not just a relief to her wrists but a signal to everyone watching. The tide was shifting. Gasps erupted among the spectators, and the tension that had threatened to suffocate the room began to turn into something electric, unpredictable. The judge cleared his throat, attempting to reassert control, but the colonel's mere presence overshadowed him completely. He addressed the court with a calm but commanding tone, revealing knowledge that none expected him to carry. He knew of the corruption that had targeted the tomb guard, of the officials who had tried to desecrate sacred grounds for their own gain, and of her refusal to yield even under threats. With every word, the courtroom transformed from a stage of humiliation to a platform of revelation, and all eyes shifted from the smirking prosecutors to the trembling judge who had thought himself untouchable. The tomb guard, now free from the cuffs, stood taller than ever before, her shoulders squared as she met the colonel's eyes. In that moment, she understood that she was no longer fighting alone. The colonel turned to her, his voice softening for the first time as he said, "A soldier does not bow to corruption. You did your duty, and now it is time the truth is heard." Those words ignited a spark in the room, drawing murmurs of agreement from the spectators who had been too afraid to speak until now. The prosecutors shuffled nervously, whispering among themselves, realizing their carefully constructed lies were beginning to crumble. The judge attempted to regain control, slamming his gavel and demanding order, but the balance of power had shifted, and no hammer could silence what had been unleashed. The guard finally spoke, her voice calm but unshakable, recounting in detail the events that had led to this trial, the official who had attempted to dishonor the tomb, her refusal to allow it, and the threats that followed when she dared to resist. Every word struck like a blade of truth, undeniable and piercing, reinforced by the colonel's presence. By the time she finished, the courtroom was no longer against her. The crowd had turned, the whispers growing into a rumble of outrage against those who had tried to destroy her. And though this was only the beginning of the storm, one thing had become clear: the truth had finally stepped into the light, and those who had once held power in lies now trembled at what was to come.